Well, hey, it's Matt Steen again, and this is another chemistry conversation. And today I'm really excited. Brian Dodd is joining. So Brian is known for his blog, Brian Dodd on Leadership. He's written a couple of books. I think you probably, and that's just like in the morning, right? And then in your real job, you work for Injoy. And remind us of your job title, because when I think of Injoy, I think Brian Dodd just runs the place.
Well, you're so kind. Yeah, my exact title is Executive Director of New Ministry Partnerships, which basically what that means is I'm John the Baptist. It's my job to make sure everything is working well at a church. So when it needs to expand its culture of generosity or raise significant resources or do leadership development, anything of that nature, I make sure everything runs well. And, kind of like you, Matt, part of my job too is to make sure that everybody at our company is busy.
Yeah.
So the church is served well, our team is served well. And yes, that is definitely a full-time job.
Nice. So you will hear as Brian comes into the room, look busy, here comes Brian. Is that pretty much how that works? Or
I wish people were more intimidated by me, but it is probably quite the opposite.
Oh well. I'll keep my illusions. So Brian and I were talking the other day, and over the last few weeks, Brian has been kind of playing secret shopper, just kind of bopping around to different churches that are open in the Atlanta area, kind of looking and seeing what's going on and visiting, just to kind of learn what churches are doing well, what churches are struggling with as they start to reopen from COVID. And so just wanted to have a quick conversation today, Brian, about what you're seeing that churches, are doing, what are they doing particularly well? What are they struggling with? That kind of thing. And just kind of share a little bit about what you're seeing. So with that, let me tee it up with an incredibly broad and unfair question. Okay.
Yeah.
So Brian, as you're visiting these churches, what are you seeing?
Yeah, the secret shopper thing, Matt, you just said that was totally unintentional. I love the church. I love the local church.
Yeah.
The local church changed my life. I've been serving it in terms of volunteer leadership and professionally for 30 years now.
Yeah.
And so, when we were raising our daughter, we had this phrase, on Sunday, the Dodds go to church. And by the way, if your friends come over, they're going to church. On Sunday, the Dodds go to church,
Yeah.
So that's one of the axioms of the Dodd household. We never knew how much it'd be needed,
Yeah.
So anyway, the bottom line is churches would be opening at different periods of time. So my wife's on staff at a church, so we would fulfill those responsibilities, and then we'd go to a live service. So we'd go to an early virtual service and then a live service. And that secret shopper thing just kind of morphed out of that a little bit. But yeah, I've been able to see some things that I think are common trends across the board of all the churches I've visited. And I want to really encourage pastors and church leaders with this. You should be very excited about your opening weekend or getting started. Because a lot of times people are just very concerned and for varieties. And yes, you should be concerned about safety, and you should be concerned that, the protocols are met, and people, you should be concerned about all that. But as it relates to the people who come to those initial services want to be there.
Yeah.
They're your church's core. They're your church's early adopters. They are so excited to be in the room that, in my opinion, in terms of, feedback from the audience, which every pastor and church leader just dreads on a Monday morning or now Sunday afternoon, with that particular group, that is your raving fans.
Yeah.
So just be very encouraged. And as those people begin to come back, it is truly a celebratory experience, which leads to point number 2. They are very forgiving of mistakes. And you know what? None of us have been through a global pandemic before. None of us have tried to, your church staff are doing jobs they were not hired for. Your volunteers may or may not be doing jobs that they are gifted in, that's their gifting and passion and calling. And everybody had always used the phrase, everybody's getting under the heavy end of the log, to pull these services off and pull off these virtual gatherings. Everybody's doing everything they can, and therefore everybody is very forgiving.
Yeah.
So as you reopen, if the traffic flow is not right, or we had too many people in the restroom at a time, or something, just anything you could come, the children are misbehaving in the audience, or just anything that may come up. People are just so excited to be there that, number two, they are so incredibly forgiving. Now, this leads to point number three. So I've given you two really good positives, and now I want to give you one to keep an eye on. Whomever your nicest people are, regardless of where they serve, you want them out front as churches return. I always go back to the movie Remember the Titans, and it's the championship game near the end of the movie. And they have really kind of found an opponent that they're going to have to really think outside the box to defeat. And, Coach Boone starts making players, if you're on offense, you're now on defense. You're playing both ways the entire game, and everybody's job description is changing because the needs of the moment mandate it. Yeah. And so what happens, you may be in children's ministry. You may be a youth worker. You may work in, you may be a greeter already. You may be a Sunday school teacher, small group leader. You may be in worship and arts, technology, okay? Wherever you may be, if you're one of the nicest people in church, you need to have them out front. From the parking lot to wherever your various points of contact are till they get into their seat. The last person you want checking people in, if your church elects to check temperatures, checking temperatures, I'll go back to the Jerry Seinfeld episode, The Soup Nazi. You don't want the COVID Nazi out front.
Right.
You don't want somebody who goes, I feel God is calling me to keep this place safe. Okay, gotcha. Well, you're on the sanitation team. Okay, you're going to clean up between the services. Yeah. You're not engaging the people. There was one service I attended that everybody was their opening Sunday. Everybody was so excited to be there. So people are talking in the lobby. The lobby is the gathering space. So out of muscle memory of your core people, they're going to gather in the gathering space unless you're very proactive in your messaging, right, which is also a very important factor. So I'll just call this individual the COVID Nazi, then starts yelling at everybody in the vestibule. So gotcha. We all disperse, and it really was water off our backs because everybody's just so excited to be there. But that individual creates culture. Is your church a celebratory church? Is your church a fearful church? Is your church very process driven? Whomever you have out front is going to determine the culture and direction and intent of everybody that's attending. So put your nicest people out front, regardless of.
And what you're saying there is you're not necessarily putting people there that are going to look the other way on the expectations or anything like that. You're just wanting gracious people that aren't going to go in with the bullhorn and say, evacuate the area, you rule breakers, right?
Correct. This is where you want to be wise as a serpent and harmless as a dove. And this is where preparation and training leading up to the reopenings take place. Yeah. And a lot of churches do this, so I'm probably not, giving any magical tip here that's going to revolutionize, but have practice services with your core people, or something of that nature. Work out the kinks. You're going to make mistakes. Yeah. The beauty of the local church is this: every 7 days we get another shot at it. And I don't think we're going to create anything that Jesus isn't powerful enough to overcome. So you go in gracious, you go in understanding that, hey, this isn't going to go perfect, but let's just properly evaluate. Let's make sure our people are safe. Let's make sure they have the best experience possible. Your job is not to take people's temperatures. Your job is not to keep people safe. Your job is not to ensure everybody wears a mask. Your job is to be a gracious host. And if you hosted somebody in your home during COVID-19, what would you want that experience to be like for them? Well, now take that on a macro level. That's what you want to have happen at a local church.
Gotcha. So that said, I want to go back to a story that you told me. I guess what was it, 4th of July weekend church that you visited that seems to have done this really well. I mean, even starting weeks in advance, right? Tell me a little bit about that experience, if you would.
Yeah, definitely. So a church I used to attend many years ago and where I was an elder at, and then another church hired my wife to be the receptionist. So I became a staff spouse and followed my wife. But it's Fellowship Bible Church in Roswell, Georgia, just north of Atlanta. The pastor is Crawford Loretz. And, leadership determines direction.
Yeah.
And the pulpit drives ministry, whether it's live or virtual. Okay. So they were brilliant, and Crawford was brilliant. He had a great team around him. So, Crawford's obviously the face of it, but it's a team effort. What they did about 3 or 4 weeks leading up to it, mask became a big issue in their church. Okay. Or at least for a section of their church. And so for about 3 weeks or 3 or 4 weeks leading up to it, they send out a weekly email. And Crawford talks about a number of things: general church information, obviously racial issues, particularly in the Atlanta area and our nation, what we're dealing with. And then he'd say, okay, we're going to be opening on July the 5th. By the way, we've gotten a lot of questions on this. I'm asking everybody to wear a mask. He goes, you may fall in a variety of different places on that issue. I don't like wearing a mask, but I'm going to wear a mask because we operate under the law of love. And our church is about making disciples. And we want to make as many disciples as possible. And if there's someone who's concerned or something of that nature, I want them to know that if they walk into our sanctuary, 2 rows over with social distancing, they don't have to worry about that individual. They can just focus on connecting with the heart of God and having their life changed by the message.
Wow.
So what happened is, continually for 3 or 4 weeks, that message kept being driven home. Now, Crawford connected with those who might have issues by saying, I don't want to wear one either.
Yeah.
But he elevated the conversation. He
got it out of the political quagmire that it's become and just attached it to the gospel. Imagine
exactly. That. And it's not about your rights or your preferences or your privileges or your feelings. It's about, we are here and we exist, the law of love. We are here to disciple and love on and comfort and bless other people. So he made it about others. So that messaging, when you arrive in the parking lot, we're getting out of our cars and you start seeing people put on their mask at their cars.
Wow.
And then they're walking to it. And Crawford is a nationally known pastor. Gospel Coalition, just, on and on. I could go on and on. Crawford's there in the lobby with his mask on, celebrating with everybody as they enter the building.
So now I want to unpack that for a minute, because you told me something that I think would probably surprise people about his wiring, and he's a little bit more introverted, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So it's not typical for him to be out front in front of the crowds and hanging out with people and all that on a typical week, right?
No, here's Crawford, and Crawford's one of my dearest friends, and I love him immensely on a personal level. Crawford was never one to, quote unquote, work the room.
Yeah.
But Crawford did not hide in the green room either.
Yeah.
Crawford would come out and he always sat on the front row. Well, there's kind of that radius there that he'd talk to all the people in the radius. Well, then by that time, the clock had run out and the service was starting, Yeah. Well, this time, Crawford was intuitive enough. The needs of the moment mandated he lead from out front in a specific area.
That's a big deal.
Yeah, both in graciousness as well as the process. And what he did brilliantly, because introverts, people with the gift of administration, anything like that, they have a natural bent to prioritize processes over people. Mm-hmm. Just how God wired them. Yeah. And we need those individuals, obviously. Yeah. Somebody's got to get the job done, Crawford this time stepped out of that because of the needs of the moment, and he prioritized people over the process. And here's the interesting thing, Matt. Because he did that, the people willingly accepted the process.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Good on him, man.
Yeah.
That's so cool to hear. So
Yeah, it's interesting. I wrote a post about that, and I saw Crawford. We connected, and he's like, Brian, we really have to be careful when you show up at a service, because you're going to get the thing. And I said, well, I only share good news first and foremost. I don't use my platform to throw people under the bus. So that's number one. But number two, yeah, you did amazing work. And I was glad that I was able to share that story, and that story was able to help literally thousands of churches. But yeah, a couple of things from that. Prepare, repair. We all know the value. Anybody who reads your material, watches your content, understands the value of preparation. You cannot over prepare during COVID-19. You cannot over communicate during COVID-19. And you have to lead with the law of love. You have to understand that people are at a myriad of spectrums. We've never faced this before. They're all processing it different. And you have to model the behavior and build bridges so that as many people as possible can be affected by your mission and vision.
that's awesome. That's awesome. So we'll link off to that blog post that you mentioned, that I think you have eight things that he did really, or that they did really well as a church. And I mean, a lot of that comes from the leadership of Crawford, but we'll link off to that. So Brian, I want to be respectful of your time and everybody else's. So I'll ask you one more question, and then we'll kind of jump out, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
So as we wrap this up, as you're kind of bopping from church to church to church to this season, kind of seeing what people are doing well and maybe not so well, what's one thing that you'd leave the pastors and the church leaders that are listening to this right now? What's one thing that you would leave with them as they lean into this season that seminary never got them ready for?
Matt, that's a fair question and a very tough question. Yeah. Here's what I'd like to say. We live in a world now that people will find a tweet that you sent out 15 years ago or something of that nature. And the interesting thing is, I've done a number of these interviews, as have a lot of people. Mm-hmm. We're taking a snapshot of how people are feeling on that day, on that moment, knowing that things could change and tomorrow they will have a completely different opinion. Okay. Absolutely. With that being said, as an overview, asking for grace, here's the one thing I'd want to leave for pastors, and you have to understand the context of which I'm going to say this. I love the local church. Mm-hmm. And the gathering of people. I've given my life for the gathering of people. Mm-hmm. And that type of thing. Hebrews 10:25 is a verse we got to wrestle with. And you're all familiar with the verse, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. We used to weaponize that verse for guilt and church attendance. Ooh. Do not forsake the assembling of yourselves together. Okay. However, now I think the second half of that verse, we do have to wrestle with it as pastors, church staff, elders, church leaders, all the more as you see the day drawing near. I think the question church leaders must ask in their leadership team, as they let the Bible in a biblical context and a biblical worldview shape their decision-making moving forward, is this. Do you see the day drawing near? Yes or no? That's question number one. If the answer is no, then okay, there's not going to be some heavy decisions made after that. But if it's like, yeah, I mean, we're in the end times, or we can at least see the signs, or the day is drawing near, then you have to wrestle with the statement above that, which is, don't neglect meeting together all the more. Right. So if you see the day drawing near, just the domino effect of those decisions is this. What does all the more mean? All the more means Sundays are a given. Should we crank up and resurrect Sunday nights and Wednesday nights? I mean, that's an extreme deal or something of that nature. But that we've got to wrestle with the second half of that verse and what that verse means. And here's what I think. A lot of churches are waiting that, okay, we're not going to regather, or, I know cases are spiking, but we're not going to regather until we can bring everybody back as it was.
Mm.
That may not be able to happen.
Right.
So gathering together in person, not virtually online, but in person, we probably need to reimagine what that, I'll call it 60-minute live experience is like.
Yeah.
And honestly, Matt, I'm 54 years old. It may wind up looking like how I grew up. Kids are in the service.
Mm-hmm.
I got to admit it. We practiced social distancing back then, but that's because we were a small church. It was not by design.
Right.
It was by default. Okay.
Right.
So I just leave pastors with that in your context. And by the way, here's what else I've learned. The context of one church here is different than the context of a church 1 mile away.
Right.
Different leadership, different experiences, different age groups. So obviously the context in Georgia is going to be different than the context in Maryland or Oklahoma or California or Idaho or New York. So within your context, within your leadership, within your people, wrestle with the second half of Hebrews 10:25 and let your biblical worldview of that text and passage shape how you make decisions moving forward.
And to be clear, you're not necessarily saying that we need to rush back to, large gatherings and all that kind of stuff. You're saying maybe part of what we need to be doing is thinking about what does that gathering together look like in this particular context, for the foreseeable future. Is that, or am I mishearing you?
You don't want to be reckless, but you don't want to be fearful.
Right. You be wise, right?
Correct. Wise as a serpent, harmless as a dove. And what that may mean, look, once again, it's context. Context is king on this.
And this is July 13th of 2020
Correct.
At 10:43 a.m. And, we reserve the right to change our minds.
With new and additional information. Exactly. So look, here's the thing. If you're a pastor who says, you know what, things are spiking, I just don't know if I feel good about it, that is different than 4 of my staff people have COVID. Those are 2 different contexts. So don't be reckless, but simultaneously don't be fearful, and wrestle with the second half of that verse. And once again, if we meet, it may not look like it did. Now that will depress your youth pastor and your children's pastor. Okay. But hey, look, we're all figuring it out as we go.
Yeah.
So I will say this. If you meet and you pull back, no one likes playing for a losing team. And you're like, the local church is facing a global pandemic. We can't beat it. Facing racial unrest, can't beat it. Facing organizations whose doctrinal statements literally attack the local church, can't beat it. Governors, mayors,
right?
So when you take ground, don't give up ground. That would be another thing I'd tell churches. But I tell you, we're no one has a harder job right now than a pastor.
Oh, that's true.
Every decision they make, a minimum of a third of their congregation will vehemently disagree with it. So
that's if they're lucky, right?
Oh, yeah, if they're lucky.
Yeah.
So that's it. By the way, that's the importance of your elders. I mean, that's why God biblically in the New Testament put those individuals around you for that spiritual leadership and guidance.
Right.
So therefore, you kind of have a unified leadership front. Here's another interesting thing, Matt, and you and I could talk for days. COVID is the greatest mirror / fillet knife / accelerator I've ever seen in my life. COVID is showing churches and individuals who they are. It's a mirror. A fillet knife opens it up,
Right.
We're all being opened up and exposed for who we are, our temperaments, our viewpoints, our passions. And it's an accelerator in the fact that however we feel and whatever's going on in our life is exponentially lived out on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And that's what pastors are dealing with. By the way, every individual person is going through that, but every individual church is going through the mirror, fillet knife, and accelerant process as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Brian, thank you. Thanks for taking some time and sharing with us today. And we'll link off to Brian's blog and every social media channel he's got, and even some of his books down below. But Brian, thanks so much for the time.
Well, anytime. Can I say one final word to your listeners?
Sure.
I want to give an unpaid endorsement for chemistry staffing. And you're laughing. Look, and I'm serious. Chemistry staffing is one of my favorite organizations. I deal with church leaders all day. That's all I do. There's not two more equipped, better, smarter, more pastor-loving people than Matt Steen and Todd Rhodes. And churches, I've written about it and I've talked about it. Now is the time to put together your dream team. As you're reimagining your church, reimagine the staff you wish you had. And it may not be an entire staff. It may be this area or that area or something of that nature. Because people are available right now.
Yeah.
And this is the time to actually have a post-COVID vision.
Yeah.
And begin to build the staff that'll allow you to impact your community in a post-COVID world. And there's not two better people who can help you with that than Todd and Matt. And I can't recommend them enough. And seriously, pastors, have a post-COVID vision. Look at your staff, see where the world's going. Do you have the staff with the skills, training, talents, abilities, giftedness, and calling to reach that? And if not, you need a conversation with Todd and Matt.
Well, Brian, thank you. That was definitely unexpected, and that has secured your place on the Christmas card list this year. Thanks for that. So, and thanks to all of you guys that are popping in to watch this. We're grateful for your willingness to spend some time with us. Hope these are helpful for you guys. Thank you.